The ballroom went silent the moment Yelizaveta Vorontsova grabbed the filthy beggar by his collar and kissed him. A dropped champagne flute shattered against the marble. Her mother fainted into a footman's arms. Anything was better than being chosen by the Tsar's cruelest suitor. Anything, even kissing a stranger in rags who'd wandered in from the snow. But when she pulled back, breathless, the beggar smiled, slowly, knowingly, and whispered against her trembling lips, "You've just kissed the Duke of Arkhangelsk, my lady, and now you belong to me." Her blood turned to ice, because no one had seen the Duke's face in 7 years. They said he was dead. They said he was a monster. They said whoever married him never lived past the wedding night. So what was he doing dressed as a beggar in the Vorontsov ballroom? Why did he look at her like he already knew her name? And what dark secret had just bound her to the most dangerous man in all of Russia? If you want to know what Yelizaveta discovers next, and trust me, you are not ready, hit that subscribe button right now. Yelizaveta could not breathe. The Duke's whisper still burned against her mouth, hot as a brand, colder than the Neva in January. She stepped back, but his gloved hand caught her wrist beneath the torn sleeve of his beggar's coat, and the grip was iron. Not a beggar's grip, not a dying man's grip, the grip of someone who had been waiting a very long time for this exact moment. Around them, the ballroom roared back to life. Whispers cracked like whips. Her cousin Praskovia pressed both hands to her mouth. The orchestra had stopped mid-waltz, the violinist's bow frozen in the air, and from across the room she could feel the Tsar's chosen suitor, Count Miroslav Tarkanov, staring at her with eyes the color of wet slate. He had been 3 steps from claiming her hand when she had done the unthinkable. 3 steps. She had counted them as he crossed the floor, her heart a wild bird trapped in her ribs, and at the last second she had turned, seen the ragged stranger swaying near the pillar, and chosen him instead. A scandal she could survive, a marriage to Tarkanov she could not. Everyone knew what happened to his first wife. Everyone pretended they did not. But this was worse than scandal. This was a trap she had walked into wearing silk slippers. "Let go of me!" she breathed. The Duke smiled wider, and beneath the grime on his face she saw it then. The sharp jaw, the scar slicing through his left brow, the mouth that had once been painted in miniature, and passed between trembling debutantes like a forbidden prayer. Radomir Arkhangelsky, the dead Duke, the cursed Duke. The man her father had sworn would never set foot in St. Petersburg again. "Yelizaveta Mikhailovna," he murmured, so soft only she could hear. "Smile, or your mother does not leave this room alive." Her gaze snapped to the side. 2 men she had taken for servants stood near her mother's slumped form. Their hands rested too easily near their coats. Too ready, too still. She smiled. It felt like tearing her own face open. "There," he said. "Good girl." "Why?" The word scraped out of her. "Why me?" He leaned closer, close enough that the crowd would think him drunk and love-struck, rather than the threat coiled beneath the rags. His breath smelled of cloves and something darker, something burned. "Because 7 years ago, your father took something from me, and tonight, I take it back." 7 years ago she had been 13. 7 years ago her father had returned from the Arkhangelsk estate, pale and trembling, and her mother had burned every letter in the house. 7 years ago a fire had killed the entire Arkhangelsky line, or so the papers said, or so everyone said. Or so she had believed, until this moment, until this man with winter in his eyes pressed his thumb against the pulse in her wrist, and counted it like he owned every beat. "I do not know what you mean," she whispered. "You will." Tarkanov was moving again. She could see him through the gap in the crowd, his face white with fury, his hand already at the hilt of the ceremonial sword. No one was supposed to draw at a ball. Behind him, the Tsar's own envoy was rising from his chair. The Duke saw it too. He did not flinch. He simply turned, slid his filthy arm around her waist as though they had been lovers for a century, and said in a voice loud enough for the whole ballroom to hear, "Forgive the interruption, gentlemen. My wife and I were just leaving." Wife. The word cracked through the room like a pistol shot. Her mother woke just in time to hear it, and screamed. Yelizaveta's knees nearly gave. He held her up. Of course he held her up. He had planned every breath of this, every glance, every dropped glass, and she had been the fool who handed him the key by kissing the first stranger she saw. But as he walked her toward the great doors, past the gaping mouths and the horrified eyes and the Count whose hand finally fell from his sword in stunned defeat,
One question burned hotter than all the others in her chest. What had her father stolen from him? And what, in God's name, was she now going to be made to pay? Outside, the snow was falling. A black carriage waited. The door was already open.
The carriage door swallowed her whole. Velvet seats black as a coffin's lining, and the smell of leather and that strange burnt sweetness that clung to him. He climbed in after her, pulled the door shut, and rapped twice on the roof. The horses jolted forward before she had even found her breath. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The lanterns outside threw moving shadows across his face, and she watched them slide over the scar, the hollow cheeks, the mouth she had kissed without knowing. Her lips still felt warm. She hated that they did. "You will not get away with this," she said. "I already have." She turned to the window. St. Petersburg slid past in smears of gold and snow, the palace spires distant as a dream, and she thought of her mother, slumped on the marble, screaming as the doors closed. She thought of her father, who would be told within the hour. She thought of all the years she had spent making herself small, smiling at the right men, laughing at the wrong jokes, swallowing her own voice until it bled, so that her family might survive whatever shadow had crept into their house 7 years ago. Her mother had stopped sleeping that winter. Her father had started drinking. The servants had been dismissed one by one until only the deaf cook and the half-blind groom remained. And no one in 17 years of her life had ever told her why. She had asked once, when she was 15. Her father had slapped her so hard she tasted copper for 3 days. He had wept afterward, in the corridor, his forehead against the wall, whispering, "Forgive me, forgive me, forgive me." But he had never told her what she was supposed to forgive. Now she sat across from a man who had been burned alive in a fire that had apparently never happened, and she understood, with a sickening clarity, that her father's silence had been a debt, and debts came due. "Where are you taking me? Home? That is not my home." "It will be." She forced herself to look at him, really look, beneath the grime and the rags. He was younger than she had thought, no older than 30, tall, lean as a wolf in the lean months, with eyes the colour of the river before it froze. There was nothing soft in him, nothing kind. And yet his hands, resting loose on his knees, were beautiful. Long fingers, calloused at the tips. A scholar's hands that had been taught to do other things. "How long have you been planning this?" she whispered. "Since I was 23 years old, and your father left me to die in a cellar that smelled of my mother's blood." The words hit her like cold water. She flinched before she could stop herself. He saw it. Of course he saw it. His mouth tightened, and something flickered behind his eyes, something that was almost regret and almost not. "You did not know." "I did not know." He looked at her then, for a long moment, and the carriage rattled on through the dark, and she felt the strangest thing happen inside her chest. A loosening, a breaking, because she had spent 7 years being punished for a crime no one would name, and now here at last was someone who knew the name, and she wanted, God help her, she wanted to ask, "Tell me what he did." "No, you owe me that much." "I owe you nothing." His voice was quiet. "But you will learn it, in time, and when you do, you will hate him more than I do." She did not believe that. She could not. Her father was a weak man, a frightened man, a man who drank too much and prayed too loud. But he was not a murderer. He was not the kind of man who left a boy to die in a cellar. Was he? Her hands had begun to tremble. She pressed them flat against her skirt so he would not see, but his gaze missed nothing, and she watched his expression shift again, that flicker, almost gentle, almost cruel. "You are cold," he said. "I am not." He took off the ragged coat without a word and held it out to her. Underneath, his shirt was fine linen, white as bone, and she realized with a small shock that even his disguise had been an illusion within an illusion. The beggar had been a costume. The Duke beneath it had been waiting all along. She did not take the coat. He laid it across her lap anyway. His knuckles brushed her knee through the silk, and she felt the touch travel up her spine like a struck match. She hated that too. "What is your name?" she said, because she had to say something, anything, to drown out the sound of her own pulse. "Your real name, not the title." "Radomir." "Radomir." She tasted it. It tasted like the burnt sweetness on his breath. "And what am I to you, Radomir? A wife, a hostage, a revenge, all three, and which one matters most?" He was quiet for so long she thought he would not answer. The carriage slowed. Outside, through the frosted window, She saw the great black gates of an estate she did not recognize, wolves carved into the iron, and beyond them, a house that rose out of the snow like a sleeping beast. "I have not decided yet," he said. The gates opened. She did not know it yet, but inside that house, in a room at the top of the east tower, there was a portrait covered in a black cloth, and the woman in the portrait had her face. Whose face was waiting for her behind that cloth? And why did Radomir's hand tremble, just slightly, just once, as the carriage rolled through the gates? The house rose around her like a held breath. 3 stories of black stone, windows lit in only a handful of rooms, the rest dark as missing teeth. Servants she could not quite see opened doors before she reached them. The wolves in the iron gate had been carved with their mouths open, and she understood, walking beneath them, that she was meant to feel like meat. Radomir said nothing as he led her through a great hall hung with portraits turned to face the wall. Every single one, she counted 12 as they passed, 12 framed rectangles showing nothing but pale plaster and dust where eyes should have looked back. She did not ask, he did not offer. A housekeeper waited at the foot of the staircase, a thin woman with a face like folded paper, and hands clasped so tight her knuckles had gone white. She did not curtsy, she did not speak. She only looked at Yelizaveta the way one looks at a ghost one has been expecting for a very long time. "Nadezhda," Radomir said quietly, "the east tower." The housekeeper's eyes flickered. "My lord, not tonight. Tonight, she has only just arrived. Tonight, Nadezhda." Something passed between them, old and unhappy, and the housekeeper bowed her head and turned away with the smallest sound that might have been a prayer or a curse. Yelizaveta did not know which frightened her more. He led her up, 3 flights. The stairs spiraled, the carpet swallowed every footfall, and by the time they reached the top, her legs were shaking. He pushed open a heavy oak door and stepped aside so she could enter first. The room was small and circular and very cold. A single candle burned on a writing desk. The shutters were closed and bolted from the inside, as though someone had once tried to escape, or something had once tried to come in, and in the center of the far wall, taller than she was, hung a portrait draped entirely in black cloth. Her stomach turned over. "What is this?" she whispered. "This is what your father took from me." He crossed the room. His hand rose to the cloth and stopped there, hovering, and she watched his fingers tremble the way she had seen them tremble in the carriage, and she realized with a slow horror that whatever was beneath that cloth was something even he was afraid of. He pulled it down. For one long moment she did not understand what she was seeing. A young woman in pale green silk, painted against a window of summer light, one hand resting on the head of a wolfhound, dark hair piled high, a small wry mouth, eyes the color of river ice. Then her knees almost gave for the second time that night. The woman in the portrait had her face, the same brow, the same curve of jaw, the same small mole below the left ear that no one but her own mother had ever pointed out. It was as though someone had painted her 3 years ago and dressed her in a stranger's gown. "Who is she?" she breathed. Who was she? "My sister." His voice was very quiet now. "Her name was Vesna. She was 19 years old when your father strangled her in the cellar of my house, and she did not die quickly, and the last word she said was your mother's name." The room tilted. She put a hand on the desk to keep from falling. The candle flame swam. "That is not possible," she said, but it came out small, a child's voice, a voice she had not used since she was 8 years old and had stopped believing her father when he said everything was fine. "Look at her, Yelizaveta. Look at her and tell me you do not know why you were born 3 months after she was buried." The world stopped. She stared at the portrait, at the mole, at the mouth that was her mouth, at the eyes that were almost her eyes except a shade lighter, a shade colder, a shade more loved. "No, your mother could not give your father a child for 11 years. 11 years, Yelizaveta. And then suddenly, 3 months after my sister vanished, after my house burned, after my mother was buried in 3 pieces, your mother was with child, and the child looked like Vesna, so much like Vesna, that your father could not bear to be in a room with you until you were 5 years old. Stop! You were not born, you were replaced. Stop! She did not know she was crying until she tasted salt. She did not know she had stepped back until her shoulders hit the wall. He did not move toward her. He stood very still in the candlelight, the black cloth pulled at his feet, and she saw at last that he was not cruel. He was not cruel at all. He was simply a man who had been carrying this for 7 years alone, and now he had set it down, and the weight of it had crushed her instead. "I do not believe you," she said. "Yes, you do." She did. God forgive her, she did. She thought of her father's slap, of her mother burning letters, of the deaf cook, the half-blind groom, the way her own face in the mirror had always seemed to belong to someone else. She thought of the small mole below her ear that her mother had touched only once, weeping, and never again. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. "I do not know yet. You said revenge. I said I had not decided." She lifted her face to his. Her cheeks were wet. Her hands were shaking. And still, beneath the horror and the grief and the rising black tide of everything she had just learned, there was something else, something terrible and bright, a pull toward him she could not name, and would not name, because he was the only person in the world who had ever told her the truth. "Then decide," she said. He took one step toward her, then another. He was close enough now that she could see the candle flame reflected twice in his eyes. He lifted his hand. She did not move. His thumb brushed the wetness from beneath her eye, and his touch was so gentle she nearly broke apart in his hand. "Yelizaveta," he said. Somewhere below them, far below, a door slammed open. Voices shouted. Boots ran across stone. Nadezhda's voice rose, sharp with fear, and then a man's voice answered her. A voice Yelizaveta knew. A voice she had heard at every breakfast of her life. Her father had come for her, and from the way Radomir's hands stilled against her cheek, from the way his eyes went very dark and very quiet, she understood that one of the 2 men in this house was not going to walk out of it alive. Which one had she just begun to want to save? Radomir's hand left her face slowly, as though it cost him something to take it back. He turned toward the door without a sound, and in the space of a breath he was a different man entirely. The gentleness was gone. The wolf in the gate had stepped down into his shoulders. "Stay here," he said. "No. Yelizaveta, no." She wiped her face with the back of her hand. Her voice was steadier than her knees. "If my father is in this house, I will look at him myself. I will not hide in a tower like a child, while 2 men decide who I belong to." For one beat too, he simply looked at her. Then something in his mouth softened, just barely, and she saw it again, that almost regret, that almost pride, and he gave a single nod. "Then walk behind me. And if I tell you to run, you run. I do not run. You will tonight, if I say so." He opened the door. The shouting downstairs had risen, layered now with the sound of breaking glass, of furniture shoved aside. She followed him down the spiral stairs, and with every step she descended, she felt the woman she had been at the ball that evening fall away from her like a gown she had outgrown. The girl who had smiled because she was told to. The girl who had counted her suitor's footsteps. That girl was dying somewhere on the staircase behind her, and she did not mourn her. At the bottom, in the great hall beneath the wall of turned portraits, her father stood with snow still melting on his shoulders and a pistol shaking in his hand. Mikhail Vorontsov. Her father. The man who had slapped her at 15 and wept in the corridor. The man who had never once told her she was beautiful, because he could not bear to look long enough to see. He was smaller than she remembered. His coat was buttoned wrong. His eyes were red and wild, and when they found her, when they truly found her, his whole face crumpled. "Lisa," he gasped. "Liza, come here, come to me. We are leaving, now, now." She did not move. Radomir stepped between them, slow and easy, his hands open at his sides. He was not armed, he did not need to be. There was something in the way he held the room that made the pistol in her father's hand look like a child's toy. "Mikhail Andreevich," he said quietly, "you came faster than I expected." "You devil," her father's voice cracked. "You devil, you were dead. I saw the cellar, I saw the bones. You saw what you were shown. Get away from her. She is my wife, she is my daughter. Is she?" The word hung in the air between them like a blade. Her father's pistol jerked. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, and Yelizaveta watched the lie he had carried for 20 years claw its way up his throat and choke him before it could be spoken. "Father," she said. He looked at her. She had never in her life used that voice on him. Quiet, level, a voice that was not asking. "Tell me about Vesna Arkhangelskaya." The pistol dropped half an inch. His face went the color of old candle wax. "Liza, tell me." "Liza," He is poisoning you, he is. He wants only to ruin us. He has waited 7 years to ruin us. You do not know what he is. Then tell me what you are." Her father began to weep. Not the soft tears she had seen in the corridor when she was 15. These were the tears of a man whose house had finally caught fire after years of him pretending not to smell the smoke. The pistol drooped in his hand, his shoulders shook, and still he would not say it, so she said it for him. "You killed her. You killed his sister. And when my mother could not give you a child, you took the dead girl's face and pretended God had given you mine. Liza, please, say it. Please, say it. Yes." A sob tore out of him. "Yes, yes. God forgive me, yes." The hall was silent. Even the wind outside seemed to have stopped to listen. Yelizaveta felt her chest cave inward, slow and quiet, the way ice gives under weight. She had thought she would scream. She had thought she would faint, or strike him, or fall to her knees. She did none of these things. She only stood and looked at the small weeping man who had been her father, and felt the last small thread inside her snap clean. Radomir was watching her. Not her father. Her. As though he were waiting to see what she became now that the lie was gone. "What will you do?" he asked her softly. "I do not know. He came here to kill me. I know. If you ask me to spare him, I will." She turned her head. She looked at him fully. The scar through his brow. The mouth she had kissed in a ballroom because she was a coward, and kissed again now in her mind because she was beginning, terrifyingly, to be brave. He meant it. He would spare her father if she asked. He had carried his sister's death for 7 years, and he would set it down at her feet if she only said the word. And that, she understood at last, was the most dangerous thing about him. Not the carriage, not the tower, not the portrait. This, that he would give her his vengeance the way another man might give a woman flowers. "I am not asking," she whispered. Something shifted in his eyes. Not triumph, something quieter, something almost like grief, for her, on her behalf, because he understood what she had just become. Her father lifted the pistol. Whether he meant it for Radomir or for himself, she would never be sure, because in the same instant, the great doors of the hall burst open behind him, and the snow blew in, and with the snow came 6 men in the Tsar's livery, swords drawn, and at their head, white with fury and pale as a corpse, walked Count Miroslav Tarkanov. "By order of his Imperial Majesty," Tarkanov said, and his slate eyes found hers across the hall and did not let go. "The marriage is annulled. The lady returns with me, and the dead duke hangs at dawn." Radomir did not move. He did not even look at the count. He only reached back, without turning, and his fingers found hers in the cold air between them, and held. She held back. Whose hand would she still be holding when the sun came up? The hall held its breath. Snow drifted in through the open doors and settled on the marble in soft white commas, and for one strange second Yelizaveta thought how beautiful it was, how quiet, how the world could be ending and still send something so gentle through the door. Then Tarkanov took a step forward, and the second ended. "Release her hand, Arkhangelsk." Radomir did not. "I said release her. She is holding mine, Count. Tell her." Tarkanov's eyes slid to her. She had seen those eyes before, at dinners, at receptions, across the rim of a champagne flute. They had always made her feel like a horse he was considering at auction. Tonight they made her feel like a horse he had already paid for. "Yelizaveta Mikhailovna," he said softly. "Come here." She did not move. "Come here, or your father hangs beside him." Her father made a sound behind him, small, broken. The pistol slipped from his fingers and clattered on the marble. He did not bend to pick it up. He only stood there, weeping silently, the man who had lied to her for 20 years and now could not even lie well enough to save himself. She looked at him. She looked at the small, ruined creature he had become, and she discovered, with a calm that frightened her, that she did not want him to die, not because she loved him. She was not sure she ever had, but because dying would let him out of this room, and she was not ready to let him out, not yet, not before he looked her in the face every day for the rest of his life and remembered what he had done. "Take him," she said. Tarkanov blinked. "What?" "My father. Take him. Try him. Let the Tsar do what the Tsar does." But Radomir Arkhangelsk stays. "My lady, you do not understand the order. I understand it perfectly. The dead duke hangs at dawn. So make him dead again, Count. He has done it before. He is rather good at it." A muscle jumped in Tarkanov's jaw. Radomir's thumb brushed once, slow, against the inside of her wrist. He did not look at her. He did not need to. She felt the question in that one touch, and she answered it with the smallest squeeze of her fingers. Yes, yes, I know what I am doing. Yes, follow me. The Tsar, Tarkanov said, very quietly, does not negotiate with hysterical women. Then it is fortunate I am not hysterical. She stepped forward. Radomir's hand slipped from hers as she moved, and she felt the loss of it like a coat pulled off her shoulders in winter, but she walked anyway, slow and steady, until she was 3 steps from Tarkanov and his 6 men, and the swords that gleamed in the lamplight. Count, she said, may I speak with you alone? No, then I will speak with you here. She lifted her chin. You came tonight to claim me. You came because the Tsar promised you my hand, and a scandal in a ballroom does not unmake a promise the Tsar made. I understand that, but I am asking you, soldier to soldier, because that is what you were before you were a count, was it not? I am asking you to look at the man behind me and ask yourself why a duke who could have killed my father at any time in 7 years waited until tonight, until I was in the room. Tarkanov said nothing. He waited because he did not want a body. He wanted a witness. He wanted the daughter to know what the father had done. That is not a man who hangs at dawn, Count. That is a man the Tsar will want to speak with first. She watched the calculation move behind his slate eyes. Tarkanov was many things. Cruel, vain, dangerous. But he was not stupid. He had not risen to stand at the Tsar's right hand by being stupid. And he knew, she could see him knowing, that bringing the dead Duke alive to St. Petersburg, with the Vorontsov scandal in tow, was a far greater prize than a corpse swinging from a rope no one would see. You are clever, my lady, he said at last. I had not realized. No one ever does. And if I take him alive, what do I take you as? She felt Radomir go very still behind her. She did not turn. As his wife, she said, lawfully wed in a ballroom before 300 witnesses, the Tsar may annul it, the Tsar may not, but until he does, I travel with my husband, and I speak for him, and I sleep under the same roof. Those are my terms. Those are not terms a prisoner offers. They are the terms the witness offers. I saw my father confess. I will say so in any court in the empire, or I will say nothing at all. Choose, Count. A long silence. Snow kept falling through the open doors. One of the soldiers shifted his weight, and the small sound of his boot on the marble was the loudest thing in the world. Then Tarkanov laughed, once, short and sharp and almost admiring. Bind the Duke's hands, he said to his men, gently, and someone close the door. For God's sake, the lady will freeze. It happened quickly after that. Her father was taken first, and he went without a word, without even looking at her, and she found she could not look at him either. Radomir's wrists were bound in front of him with a length of soft rope, more ceremony than restraint, and he allowed it with a small dry smile that did not reach his eyes. As they led him past her, he paused. Yelizaveta Mikhailovna, he said, Radomir, you were magnificent. I was terrified. Those are the same thing, in women like you. She almost smiled. She almost did. And then he was past her, and the cold air rushed in where he had been, and she understood that whatever happened in St. Petersburg, whatever the Tsar decided, whatever new prison or new altar waited for her at the end of this road, she had chosen it. For the first time in her life she had chosen, and the choosing had cost her a father and bought her a stranger, and she did not yet know if it had been worth it. Tarkanov offered her his arm at the door. She took it because she had to. His glove was cold through her sleeve. You realize, my lady, he murmured, as they stepped into the snow, that I have not given up. The Tsar may annul, the Tsar may listen, but I am patient, and you have made a very long enemy of me tonight. I know. You do not seem afraid. I am. I simply do not show it to men like you anymore. His hand tightened on hers. Just enough to remind her that the road to St. Petersburg was long, and that not every danger in this story wore rags or carried titles. Some wore the Tsar's livery, and smiled, and waited. 3 carriages waited in the drive. Her father in the first, Radomir in the second. She was put into the third, alone, the door closed, the lock turned from the outside. Through the frosted window she could see the back of Radomir's head in the carriage ahead, dark against the lantern light, and as the horses began to move he turned, just once, and his eyes found hers through 2 panes of glass and the falling snow. He mouthed something, she could not hear it. She did not need to. Wait for me. The carriages rolled out through the wolves in the gate, and St. Petersburg waited at the end of the road, with its palaces and its Tsar and its judgment, and Yelizaveta Vorontsova, who was not Yelizaveta Vorontsova at all, pressed her palm flat against the cold glass and made him a promise back. But what was waiting for them in the capital was worse than any of them knew, because the Tsar had not sent Tarkhanov alone, and in a quiet room in the Winter Palace, a woman in widow's black was already lighting a candle for a man she had not seen in 7 years. A woman who looked, when she turned her face to the flame, exactly like the portrait beneath the black cloth. Vesna Arkhangelskaya was alive, and she was waiting for her brother to come home. The road to St. Petersburg was long. Yelizaveta did not sleep. She watched the back of Radomir's carriage through the glass, and counted the lanterns on the post road, and somewhere past the third changing station she stopped being afraid. It was a strange thing, to stop. Fear had lived inside her so long she had thought it was a bone, but the bone fell out of her on that road, somewhere in the dark between two villages whose names she did not know, and what was left in its place was not courage exactly. It was something quieter. It was the simple weight of a woman who had finally told the truth in a room full of liars, and lived. They reached the capital at dawn. The Winter Palace rose pink and gold above the frozen river, and she thought it was the most beautiful and the most terrible thing she had ever seen. What happened next she would tell, in later years, only to her own daughter, and only once. The Tsar received them in a small room with a green stove. He was older than she had expected, and tired, and he listened to her speak for almost an hour without once interrupting. When she was finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he sent for the woman in widow's black. Vesna Arkhangelskaya walked into the room on her own 2 feet, thinner than her portrait, grey at the temples though she was not yet 30, and she looked at her brother across the green stove and did not cry. She had done all her crying already, in 7 silent years of hiding in a convent on the White Sea, kept alive by a priest who had once loved her mother and who had pulled her half dead from the cellar before the fire was set. She had not written to Radomir because she had not known he had survived. He had not searched for her because he had buried her with his own hands, or so he had been told. The Tsar watched the two of them look at each other, and Yelizaveta watched the Tsar, and she understood then that the empire, in the end, was only ever a room full of people deciding whether to be merciful. He chose mercy. Mostly. Her father was sent east to a monastery, where he would live another 11 years and die quietly of a cough in winter. Tarkhanov was given a posting in the Caucasus that he had not asked for and could not refuse, and he wrote her 1 letter from there, which she burned without opening. The marriage in the ballroom was not annulled. The Tsar, who had a romantic streak no one suspected, declared it valid on the technicality that the bride had not objected, and signed the paper himself with a small dry smile. Radomir was returned to his estate. His sister came with him, so did Yelizaveta. Spring came slowly that year. The river broke up in great grey slabs, and the wolves in the iron gate were taken down and replaced, at Vesna's quiet insistence, with doves. The portraits in the great hall were turned to face outward again, one by one, over the course of a month. Yelizaveta hung the painting of Vesna in the small parlour where the morning light came in, and her own face, looking out of the canvas at her own face looking in, stopped frightening her after the first week. She and Radomir did not speak of love for a long time. They did not need to. He brought her tea in the library when she had been reading too long. She learned the way he took his bread, dry, with salt. He taught her to ride properly, not the side-saddle nonsense of girls, but astride, like his sister had ridden before the world had broken her. She taught him, without meaning to, how to laugh again, small at first, surprised at himself, and then larger, and then freely, until Nadezhda the housekeeper wept one afternoon in the kitchen because she had not heard that sound in the house since he was a boy. One evening in late May, he found her in the garden. The lilacs were out. She was barefoot in the grass, which would have horrified her mother, and she was holding a letter from Vesna, who had gone to take the waters in Baden, and was writing home about a clockmaker she had met, who had made her smile twice in one afternoon. Radomir sat down beside her in the grass. He did not speak for a while. He watched her face read the letter, and when she folded it and set it on her lap, he reached over and took her hand. "Yelizaveta Mikhailovna," he said, "Radomir Pavlovich, I have decided." She looked at him, the scar through his brow, the mouth she had kissed in a ballroom in a moment of terror, and chosen, slowly, every day since, in moments of nothing at all. And, Not revenge, not hostage, then what? He lifted her hand to his mouth and pressed his lips to the inside of her wrist, where her pulse beat steady now, no longer a wild bird, only a woman alive in a garden in May. Wife, he said, only wife, if you will have me. She did not answer in words. She leaned forward in the grass and kissed him properly this time, slowly, with nothing watching but the lilacs and a thrush in the hedge, and when she pulled back she was smiling. And so was he, and somewhere very far away a ballroom full of horrified strangers was still gasping, and would gasp forever, and neither of them cared at all. The doves on the gate creaked softly in the wind. She was home.